Grandstand Sunday afternoon coverage, first week of the finals, was Port Melbourne versus Geelong in the second qualifying final. The North Ballarat coach in Jared Fitzgerald was alongside us in the commentary box, and what we saw, Jared, was one of the best games of the season.
It was a beauty, Peter. A real final, had a great deal of intensity, but significantly early. A lot of goals scored, and that's what was pleasing.
Well, it was difficult to believe there were that many goals scored when you consider that these are the best two defensive teams in the competition, but it was free-flowing early on. Port Melbourne had the better of it early on, kicking 4 of the first 6 goals, but then Geelong had that burst at the end of the first quarter where they kicked 3 goals in 3 minutes and got themselves right back into the picture. In fact, they hit the front at quarter time.
That's right, yeah. And we said all along, even though Port Melbourne were winning a lot more ball, we always felt at times Geelong could get themselves back in the game with their ability to score. But yeah, we witnessed a very, very good game of footy, and Port Melbourne obviously now are in good shape to defend their title.
Dean Galea coming up with 1 goal in the first term. Shane Valenti got a couple, and he was really important. But then this is the period where Geelong was just able to run the footy through the middle of the ground. Simpkin got a couple of really important touches. Burns and Schroeder joined in the party. And we knew we had a great contest on our hands at that stage. And not only was it very enjoyable to watch, but it was physical out there as well.
It was. There's no doubt. When you might see the scores and think it was a free-flowing game, well, it wasn't. It was a very, very ferocious physical game.
And even so, in the second quarter, despite that physicality, despite the fact that both teams were doing their best to close it up, we finished up with 13 goals kicked in the second quarter, and Port Melbourne had their best second quarter of the season with 9 goals. And not much that Tom Gillies could have done about Dean Galea at various times, the form that he was in.
No, and also we said I think Dean missed his first 2 or 3 shots at goal early on, so he had to recover from that. But he presents towards the ball, he plays in front. He's a very, very good VFL forward. There's
David Wojcinski kicking the middle pin of 3 important goals. Again, that Geelong got in a clump after Port Melbourne got it out to 24 points. Looked like Geelong was going to battle back, and then all of a sudden Port kicked the last 3 goals of the term. It was such an enjoyable second quarter to watch, and it set up a great second half.
Yes, it did. Yeah, I think those that watched the game here live and watched the game on television were really witnessed a terrific struggle. 2 very, very good sides. And a game worthy of where we think the competition's at the moment.
That was a fabulous kick in from Chris Kane, who got it to John Baird, who is so important as he normally is. They had a good patch at the end of the term. The youngster Bruce kicked a couple of goals. Port had sway at 3/4 time, 30 points. Geelong, though, had the breeze at their back, Jared, and you always thought that 30 points was probably just not quite enough to be safe.
Yeah. I was a little bit the other way, as you know. I thought it was a fair buffer in a final that was tight and tough on a very warm day, but Geelong whittled the lead away very, very quickly, and we had a great struggle halfway through the quarter.
They got a goal through Guthrie at the start of the term, then Brown got one, then Simpkin got a couple. All of a sudden, the gap was back to 5, and then Toby Pinwell stood up and kicked a couple of goals in the final term, and their resilience, Port Melbourne, is just something to be admired.
Yeah, and it's interesting, Peter, when you are coming from a fair way back, the first challenge is actually to get level, but then you need to kick a couple to get yourself clear. That's what Geelong were unable to do.
It's a bit like the Tour de France some stage. Chasing down the breakaway is easy, but getting past them is another thing. There are the numbers at the end of the day, but what a win to Port Melbourne. 22 points the margin of victory in the end. 2012 132 to 16-14 110. Geelong lives to fight another day, and Port marches straight through to the preliminary final.